All right, guys, we are live with Lee Povey of Maximize Your Potential Coaching, MYP. I kind of hadn't seen that writing, so looks like MVP, most valuable player, but yeah, it is MYP. So Maximizing Your Potential Coaching. He has his own podcast. I'm not going to read his accolades on this because I should have a intro when we do air this on the podcast, because he has a very long and extensively tenured and impressive resume. I'll read that in that. But we want to hear about what's going on with you with Maximize Your Potential. Lee, tell us what's going on.
So, yeah, I launched it, when was it? About August last year with Ryan Owens, GB track cyclist, who will be going to the Olympics in Tokyo.
GB being Great Britain.
Great, yeah, great. He's on the Great Britain team. He will be riding the team sprint at the Olympics in Tokyo in, what's that, 4 or 5 months' time now.
They just announced today, I don't know if you saw this, that today being March 22nd, that they are not allowing international spectators.
Yeah, I've known that for a week or so. I'm gutted because one of my close friends is the coach of the Dutch team. And, you know, Ryan is one of my best mates, and I wanted to go and watch both of them at the Olympics and in their element. And yeah, I'm not going to be able to go now, so that's a little bit of a shame.
Well, it's a good thing they're at least having it finally after, you know, some signs of positive.
Yeah, I think it's fairly likely it's going to go ahead now. So yeah, I'm super excited for them. Like there's nothing worse than training 4 years for something and then missing that opportunity, and people were devastated last year.
Some people training 8, 12 years, right? You go through those, you know, Olympic cycle blocks and you have everything periodized. I mean, I know some of these athletes that literally, if they started today, they would know what their training is going to be on March 22nd of 2031. Because they have everything laid out exactly as it needs to be. So
if I'd continued working in my previous role with USA Cycling, I had my training blocks laid out until Paris already. Yeah. Wow. So an idea of what they would have been doing, idea of the races that they would have been doing. So yeah, I like to work that kind of far ahead as well. And you're not working like, you know, I wouldn't say exactly what we're going to do that session because new information might become available that would change it. But for sure, a good idea of what the program would look like. Yeah.
Yeah. The one I saw was it was a Cuban Olympic weightlifting program, and they had those kind of situations laid out where I don't think much of the science is changing on what, you know, they believe in, and yeah, so their periodization blocks were again pretty well laid out, and they know they're going, you know, 83% for 4 sets of 3 or whatever, you know, again 11 years from now. So it's
weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting is like my guilty pleasure. I've got far too much of that suggestions on my YouTube. I love watching people with really good lifting technique.
I'll send you some of my snatches that I do. They're good. They're good. I don't lift as much as you know, some people, but they're very smooth and pretty.
Yeah, my favorite is Lasher, so I'm just going to compare you to Lasher. So if you can't do a 225 kilo snatch,
I cannot. But I can drop it on my head. I have a few videos that are not great of those fails. I have two of those videos somewhere on my phone that just when certain people want to see it, and I walked away from both of them unscathed, luckily, knock on wood. But they look very scary. And I will say, again, for anyone out there watching, Olympic weightlifting has one of the lowest injury rates of any sport in the history of all sports that has been researched. The only injuries that tend to happen in Olympic weightlifting are accidents where you're dropping like a 25-kilo plate on your toe or something, that kind of thing. So anyway, coming back to maximizing your potential coaching, we got a little off topic there, but yeah, so you have the coaching company. Bring us back to what it is you guys offer.
So a variety of things, but it basically comes down to human behavior performance coaching. So what we want to do is allow you and enable you to be the best version of yourself possible. So to remove the limiters that are getting in your way of you, interacting in the world in the way that you want to give you some emotional and mental models that help you understand the world to a greater degree, and most importantly, yourself and how you are in the world. And probably the most important part of that is distinguishing the world happening to you and by you. So to you is when you're that victim and you're, the world is happening to you and you're responding to everything the world's thrown at you, and by you is when you are making the choices and when you're in control of your life.
Yeah, I love it. Reminds me of common language that gets used of, I have to go pick up my kid from, soccer practice or whatever, versus I get to,
yes.
This is what's happening. It's not,
yes.
I have to do this. What a burden it is on me. And literally that language is very powerful. So yeah, just changing. And it's very easy to slip into those things. And again, when I sometimes will correct people as grammar, and I only do that with certain people that I trust. And, I feel like I can do when they get the your and your, you are versus possessive your.
Yeah.
I'm only going to do that if I care a little bit, but I'm like, how you do anything is how you do everything, and in some capacity. And so when you don't care about little details like that, what does it say about your training? What does it say about, that higher level? And can we be elevating your performance and optimizing some of that stuff? So very cool. Totally in line with.
I love that you brought up language. Language is one of my favorite topics. I think many of us misunderstand, I don't know if that's the right term, or just don't quite get how powerful the language we use is on our own emotional being and the being of everybody else around us. And as you say, that was I love the example that you used there. What a great example. I get to go and pick my kids up from school, or I have to go and pick my kids up from school. The task is the same. The task doesn't care how you view it, but your viewing of it is going to have a dramatic impact on how you enjoy the task and how everybody else enjoys it. If you go there, you're stressed. Oh, I've got to pick you, you little rascals up. Oh, you're ruining my day. Rather than, oh, I can't wait to see the kids. How was their day? The difference is huge.
Yeah, that mindset piece and the language. Yeah, it's just and taking the time to change some of that stuff. Again, a guy I follow, Ben Bergeron, big in the CrossFit space. He has a great podcast called Chasing Excellence. He had a no complaints month, because we all kind of do these little complaints. So he just challenged himself and his family, I think, to not complain for whatever it was, the course of a full month. And it's challenging. I think there was some, whatever making it means. But I think they had like one of the, wristbands that you snap, like the rubber band. Every time you complain, you do that. Or and they're a very athletic family. So perhaps the other punishment was something like every time you get caught complaining, you got to do whatever it is, 20 burpees or something like that. So, but yeah, I think the point being that, again, in terms of mindset and changing that culture around what it is you want to create. And we don't take a lot of time. And you kind of said that it's underutilized or overlooked, I think, the language of it all. And it's such simple stuff. And very few people provide the framework to say, oh, okay, instead of have to, I should say get to. And again, like things like gratitude, that's become much more popular. Just having that as you start, like, okay, I'm starting our day. Like, I'm grateful that I get to go and pick up my kid from soccer practice. I'm grateful I have a car. I'm grateful I have a kid. I'm grateful for all these different aspects of it that changes again. And moves away from just that little bits of negativity that, is just these drains on our energy, on our interactions. So in terms of, again, getting better and tweaking that dial little by little, I always say on my social medias, get 1% better every day. So it's identifying what can we do to, again, make those little changes and move in the right direction. And whether it's somebody identifying, hey, like, did you notice you said that? And changing and whatever that conversation becomes. And again, it's hard to have.
I often have that with the guy. So on our men's group, that's something I'll challenge. If somebody uses the word but, for example, I'll challenge them to replace it with and. But has the tendency as the listener to negate what was said before it. So if we say, I had a really lovely day today, but this happened.
Right.
Now you're saying you didn't have a lovely day today,
Right.
and you're just going to talk about the complaint.
Well, that's
so
that's
you can have a lovely day and talk about something that wasn't good as part of the day, and then you would say, and this happened rather than but. So yeah, language choices are really powerful.
Right. And something, my wife, she's actually the one that connected us, and I think she might be listening in the other room. But we always kind of joke about similar concepts. I had a tendency that I'm still trying to work on. I'm a New Yorker, if you guys don't know, of kind of, being very blunt, and I'll try to preface things by kind of saying, the joke is pretty much being like, no offense, but you're, but whatever. But it's I don't know how well I'm trying to, and it's or the other one in coaching that I in previously coaching, group fitness classes and things like that. We joke about a compliment sandwich of saying like, hey, your hair looks really nice today, Lee. I love those glasses. Your squat looks like trash today. But again, really nice shoes you have on.
Good on being you. Yeah.
So you put the insult or criticism in the middle there. So yeah, Maha is listening.
Are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
I have no problem.
Okay.
Go for it.
So in the UK, that's called the shit sandwich.
Yes. Exactly. So you mentioned the men's group. I did want to jump over to that. So is that part of the MYP coaching?
Yes.
And
so
I'm
that's
excited.
Part of the MYP brand for sure.
And I'm excited. I'm going to announce it here tomorrow. Lee got me to sign up for the my first men's group with him. I have done a few different men's groups in the past, and so I'm excited. So, but I want to hear. I have a little bit of expectations, having gone to some different ones. But I tell us a little bit about if somebody's listening, or they have somebody in their life that they think could benefit from it. What are the benefits of a men's group? I guess the overriding joke would be, it's really tough being a white male in 2021 versus there's actually stuff that that does get ignored. And if we can deal with it better, we can be better allies for, again, all these different movements of Black Lives Matter and stopping Asian crimes and things like, hate crimes and things like that, and just being better allies. And the better we can be and better ourselves, I think that, my hope is in seeking out a group like this, finding better ways to strengthen the insides. And so, tell us a little about what I can expect.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of address the privilege thing is really interesting. So I like that you brought that up. People can mistake that just because you have privilege, because you're a middle-aged, or you're a middle-class white guy living in California like myself, like I have a certain privilege because of that. That doesn't mean that I can't go through suffering as well. It doesn't mean that life can't be challenging for me. And actually, middle-aged white guys is the second fastest area of suicide or growing area of suicide in America and the UK at the moment, with teenage girls being the other. And teenage girls is down to internet bullying. And, the middle class white guy is because they think they're successful. So they have, they have a nice car, they have a nice house. They probably are getting divorced from their first wife. They've lost the relationship with their children because they don't know how to relate, and they've been so focused on work, and suddenly they're just really lonely. Mm-hmm. So privilege doesn't mean you can't suffer,
right?
And it means it's less likely we will, but it doesn't mean that you can't. And the group isn't necessarily about suffering. The group is about, the first thing is come into it to be a better version of you. So can you be a better version of you as a man? Can you be a better father? Can you be a better leader? Can you be a better husband? Can you be a better friend? So that's the ethos that man come to this group with. And then the other thing is there's a certain magic, for want of a better word, of getting in a space of guys and you being able to share what's going on for you and being heard. Now, guys like me and you, very sporty. I've been around men on sports fields playing rugby and in track cycling, most of my life. It's not the same experience. You will get told that you're a pussy and that, we're not here to hear your problems. Like, right. We're here to play the game. And, It's not intentional. Guys aren't doing that intentionally. They just don't have the language, and there's this societal pressure of like, we just don't do that.
Right.
So what we do.
Feelings are uncomfortable.
Exactly, feelings are uncomfortable, and I'm really glad you brought up feelings, because that's a really important thing. So we remove that kind of uncomfortableness about feelings by just acknowledging that feelings are tools. So the reason we have feelings is to give us information around the world. So we work on 4 major feelings. So that's joy, sadness, anger, and fear. And we try to boil down what is happening to us to one of these feelings, and what is that feeling telling us about the world around us? What information is it giving us? And there's no good or bad feelings. Like, anger is a useful feeling. Anger gets stuff done. Anger tells us about the world. Fear is a useful feeling. Fear is to say, hey, I need to think about this. I need to be concerned about this. There's something I need to plan for. And if we ignore these feelings, this is when men get sick. So if men completely ignore feelings, that disconnect between body and mind, that's when they start getting cancer, heart attacks, and we don't want that. I don't want guys to suffer through that. I want guys to be fully connected from brain to body.
Did you get that theory from the Pixar Inside Out movie about the 4 different...
I did not. No, I've been doing that for quite some time before that, but my wife loved that movie. Loved that movie.
I think it was a great encapsulation of, like you're saying, how do we deal with these different emotions, and what is their place also in the grand scheme of, and again, they all have a place. I always say anger is a wasted emotion. Again, having dealt with my own anger issues over the course of my life, and I'm always like, I'm very quick to let most stuff go, because especially when it riles me up, and I'm like, you know what, like, it serves me no purpose to be angry about that, because being angry, it's the cliche saying is like taking poison and hoping the other person dies, pretty much. And so anger is just something, again, understanding the physiology behind it as well. Like, sometimes it's nice to scream and be, primal, if you will, and let it out. But it's something that, again, that it has its place. And that's something, again, my wife and I have discussed, Maha, of, what is the place of anger, and should we acknowledge it, diminish it? And so to the point of emotions and things like that, again, this is where I guess the problem that we're talking about here of men not having safe spaces for this, or just spaces where, again, as much as they might love their partner and feel comfortable with their partner, there might be a feeling of it's difficult to be vulnerable, as just the way our cultures raise us as men. So I don't know a lot of men who are very vulnerable, out and about. And then the other part of it being authentic, of, there's the machismo, the bravado, that tends to be the primary way of communicating, like you're talking about in those sporting circles. But it's hard to go past that and get to a point of being vulnerable, authentic, and having more of those real conversations of like, hey, what should I do with this situation? And, like, can we talk about it? Or do you just have to go and pay somebody and see a shrink, a therapist? Or, can we find different resources like these men's groups that might be just another way to, again, I'll keep bringing up Maha because she is listening. But that we always talk about.
My wife.
Hi, honey. I have my ring on. Look, I have my ring on. But something that we always talk about of if we can prevent a lot of these little things that build up, and we know because we've seen, usually in our professions, as a physical therapist, as a sex and relationship therapist, we end up usually getting people who've had stuff going on for 10 years. Right. Yeah. And it's up to us to kind of figure out and unwind some of that and start to undo some of the damage. Versus, again, if today you're listening to this, whoever you are out there, and you're like, yeah, these little things have been bugging me about my partner, about my life. The sooner you can address it, write it down, take ownership of it, whatever that language that you want is to me, that's where you will help avoid. Not everything's going to turn into a significant issue down the line, but
can I stop you there, Bo? Because I want to go back to something you said at the beginning, which you just tied to nicely here. So I want to make a distinction. There's a distinction between anger and rage. And I think men often confuse the two. And they think if they're going to get angry, they're going to get into a rage and it's going to be uncontrollable, or the same with sadness. Like I'm going to be unbelievably sad and it's going to be depression if I feel it. And actually, emotions are pretty fleeting. If we feel an emotion properly, we should process it in a matter of seconds, if not minutes, that initial feeling of it. And then what we're trying to do is we're trying to use a model from the conscious leadership group, which is to go from below the line. So the below the line is your initial response to a situation, which can be quite emotive and can be quite sometimes destructive, and then go above the line, and it's moving through the emotion. But if you don't recognize the emotion and move through it, you can't get to the above the line. And this is why guys stay in anger. This is why guys are afraid of it, because they stay in it, and there's this well of it that they're worried about touching. Whereas if they'd been allowed to process it like little children do. So if you watch children, they're great at processing their emotions. Until we train it out of them, little boys and little girls don't treat emotions differently. They cry, they laugh, they get scared, they get sad, they get angry, all the same. And then we treat them differently. So we treat girls differently to boys. And we tell little girls, oh, it's okay for you to cry, honey. And we tell the boys, toughen up, sunshine, like get over it. Or the little boy's afraid, and we say, no, you got to be a man. That's what being a man is. We don't shift here. And what we're trying to do is undo that so that you can go through these emotional experiences so that
in a healthy way.
In a healthy way. So you're not hanging on to this stuff for years and years and years. That's when you become depressive. That's when you're that angry guy that drinks, because he's trying to medicate his anger. If you were allowed to go through that in a healthy way as an adolescent and as a teenager and as a young man, you wouldn't be like that. And one of the things I want to do is to help society realize it's okay for men to share their feelings in conversation. Say, you know what? Actually, when you said that, I felt some anger and I want to share that with you. That's being angry. It's not, I'm going to punch you in the face, mate, because of what you said. That's the unhealthy version of it. So, we can present anger, we can present fear, we can present joy and sadness. I mean, it's amazing how often men struggle with joy. Like if it's a sporting occasion, we can go nuts and we can cry with our mates and have beers. But, if we look at a flower and go, oh, that's really beautiful, your mate's going to go, the homophobic slurs are going to start, don't be gay. Like, why do you like flowers? I love flowers. What's wrong with loving flowers? So it's just allowing that space for you to be how you want to be as a man in the world.
And I would be remiss, as so much of my education is on the physical side, if I didn't double down on the fact that when you bring up children and how they are emotionally, and we should look at them for the fact that there is this authentic expression of emotions, the same with the physical capacity of hanging, sitting in the bottom of a squat. All these, kids have the most beautiful movements until they're forced to sit in a desk for however many years. And we put shoes on them. And these things that we end up, by the time you're a teenager, by the time you're an adult in a desk job, your physical capacity has become so limited. And when was the last time you rolled on the ground? When was the last time you climbed a tree? All these things that now, again, in the last almost 10 years, I would say, with the CrossFit and functional fitness, you see people walking on their hands and jumping rope and all these things that we used to do as kids. And now it's being marketed as this like revolutionary fitness trend, but it really is a lot of, hey, let's look at where we were when we started life and come back to that. Those are things we should all be able to do. We should be able to pop into a squat with our feet together, and that should not cause any issues. And if it does, let's get you back there. Like, if you haven't done anything like that for the last 20, 30 years, let's find a way to get you back there. So that's where I did want to just, throw in my little. I
love that. There was a national, I won't say which one, there was a national cycling team, track cycling team, that was having lots of back issues. And they started to hang in every gym session. And noticed, based on some good research, but noticed a dramatic difference in their back health when they were spending more time hanging. We're designed to, aren't we? That's what we're designed to do. And we move away from that. And kids are such great teachers. If you really watch children, they're teaching what we should be doing as adults that we train ourselves out of, because doesn't fit society. To go back to the emotions, you watch kids go through an emotion and they can be like right in the midst of screaming and then bang, they're smiling. Like they move through it so quickly.
Yeah.
And we stop ourselves, unfortunately, as adults, especially men.
Yeah, and a lot of that is so many taboos, movies, pop culture, rap songs, whatever you want to call it. All these different aspects of
the conditioning is so strong. The image that we're presented from media, from even women. I like the fact that you brought up. I know your wife; she's lovely. I'm sure she's very encouraging for you in your growth and very supportive. So is my wife. But it's even hard because women have a version of a man they believe that they should be attracted to, and they want to see this stoic, strong guy. And then women can find it difficult to hold that space for you because their program is like, hang on, you're not meant to behave like that. Hang on, this is uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, it's something. And I don't know if you've read the Way of the Superior Man. Have you read that one?
David Dida, yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that where it's just exploring, for those not familiar, exploring the masculine and feminine energies, where we all have a certain amount of masculine and a certain amount of feminine. However, we talk about that. Again, these are all topics that are very interesting with, again, these different conversations happening now between trans and just the LGBTQIA plus now. I don't want to miss any letters, but it's just, there's a lot going on. We're all trying to make sense of where we all fit in. And again, that's where I'm excited for this group to bring it back to that of, figuring out, what for myself, how, and again, I feel this is one thing I haven't done a men's group in a while, where again, I'm maybe it is again, that masculine cockiness, if you will, of saying like, I got myself pretty figured out. I mean, again, like I've studied psychology, sociology since high school. We had majors in high school, and I was like, okay, a lot of this makes sense. I feel like, again, I had a really good understanding of it. But there's always more you can do. So it's something where I'm excited to further explore that, but also allow it to be a resource for other men that I know there's a lot of other men. And just as an example, like we had I played high school American football, and we had one of our teammates who was 2 years older than me. We just found out a few, at this point, months ago that he had committed suicide 2 years ago, and nobody really knew because everyone kind of lost touch with him. And so as a response to that, and something that I think a lot of us knew we should have been kind of doing, is we started a Brooklyn Tech football group Zoom call once a month. We actually have it later this week. And we just get on there and everyone can kind of, it's a lot more bullshitting. Almost everyone, is around.
But that's okay. Like connection is connection. And to reference that book, there's a passage in the book where he talks about how women define their life by the connections they make, and men define them by what they achieve. And that's to do with the masculine and the feminine energy. But we forget that men need connection as well. Like men need a lot of connection, and we minimize it. We minimize it for ourselves, and we minimize it societally. And there's only certain ways men are allowed to connect. So we're allowed to go out and have beers, and we're allowed to chase women together, and we're allowed to do sports together. But that's about where you'll see men connect in society. And we need much more connection than that. And loneliness is a huge killer for men. I'm trying to think of the study. So the Nagowski sisters mention it on their book Burnout, which is an awesome book. But they talk about like not being with somebody. It takes something like 10 years off your life.
I heard and it was actually on I mentioned Ben Bergeron. I heard it on his podcast. So I don't know where the citation is coming from, but I actually remember on a recent episode, they mentioned a very similar statistic that every day of loneliness, and I'm assuming this multiplies and expands, kind of compounding interest, if you will, as it goes, but is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Something like that. In terms of the effects on your physiology.
Yeah, that was the one. Which is incredible to think about, isn't it? Like the way that we now treat smoking in society, and we know how dangerous it is. We don't treat loneliness in the same way. We don't spend a lot of money trying to stop loneliness. I know what it's like to experience loneliness. I moved to a new country where I didn't know anybody. Lonely to begin with. I came here, I coached 2 guys when I moved here, and I was desperate for a men's group and couldn't find one at the time. That would have been a really powerful time for me to find one to join, because I'd been in men's groups in the UK. So again, guys coming to my groups are coming from all walks of life. They're business leaders, they're teachers, they're athletes, they're coaches, and they're coming to find connection with other men, number one, and then they're coming to explore what it means to be a man. And without the bullshit, it's just straightforward. This is how we want to be men in the world, and everybody gets an input in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, looking forward. I'll report in to everyone listening how my first one tomorrow goes. In less than 24 hours, we're counting down the time. But let's jump over to the other topic we wanted to really cover, which is the kind of confirmation bias dogma. And I mean, there's some tie-ins to this, these concepts around these behaviors, and like you're saying, too overly developed, if you will, concepts. So yeah, for those, I think I shouted it out, is MYP has their own podcast, Maximize Your Potential, and they did a episode recently. It was a quickie, I think only 13 minutes long, on confirmation bias. But yeah, let's touch on that. We had you and I had touched on that on some of our calls previously. So I think it's a super interesting topic. Love to hear, again, share with the listeners here.
Thank you, Mike. One of the kind of, I don't know the right way to put it, and say triggers, I'm not sure it's triggers. One of the things I've struggled with in life is we assume that because somebody's good at a sport, they're going to be a good coach. Or we assume that because somebody is good at something, they're going to be a good teacher. And those things are very different. The skills to be good at something are very different from the skills to teach that to somebody else. And what tends to happen with that is then we repeat, when we're that person, what was successful for us. And, it's one of the things that holds sports people back so much is the coach wants to do the training that the coach did themselves. Yeah. So if they were a successful athlete, they're like, well, this worked for me.
Michael Jordan was not a very good coach.
No. and often the people who are the most successful are successful because they're good at being very single-mindedly focused, and they're very selfish, and they can put everything outside away and just concentrate on themselves. Being a coach is the absolute opposite of that. You cannot be selfish. You are there for everybody else. It can't be about your success. It's about the team success and your athlete success. And then the other thing is something that Brené Brown and Simon Sinek talk about a lot, which is this vulnerability in leadership. I have a lot of athletes, workers, office workers come to me and say the hardest thing for them is when they approach something with their boss hasn't got it right, they've messed it up, and they don't own it. And that's where that lack of trust comes in, and that's what people find really stressful. So that's what we tend to work on with people a lot, is to be vulnerable. Now, to be vulnerable means that you're not always going to be right. And that means looking at your confirmation bias. So the confirmation bias is our inherent tendency to make emotional choices and then try to back those choices up with facts. Yeah. We see it all the time in the political sphere where people say, well, this is what I believe. And then you try to have a discussion, and there's no real evidence behind the discussion. It's been made emotionally. There's an eminent psychologist stroke statistician called Daniel Kahneman, who's done a ton of work on this. And his favorite saying is, we think that 80% of our choices are made rationally and 20% emotionally. For the most rational people, 80% of their choices are made emotionally and 20% are made rationally. We feel things, and then we don't look for the evidence to back them up, or we don't look at all of the evidence. We just look for the evidence that supports us. And in today's age, that's getting more and more difficult for us to do, because if we go to Google, Google is going to find articles that match the articles that we were looking at in the past. So it just keeps that confirmation bias going. Now, as coaches and leaders, it's really important that we can rise above that, and we can ask ourselves, how could I be wrong? Not how could I be right? How could I be wrong? How can I challenge my preconceived views? Is there a way that this could be wrong? And if so, that's how I test what I'm doing.
And that's the scientific method, right? You're supposed to start with a null hypothesis. You're supposed to say, you're not supposed to say, I want to prove that taking creatine is going to improve my performance. You say, I want to prove that creatine will not improve my performance. And then you do the experiment. And if you're proven wrong, then you're actually like, okay, well, shows that creatine does improve performance. and has all these other effects or whatever. So, but that's the scientific method that, again, I think when we talk about, and again, I have so many different emotional responses about the political side of things that we can certainly talk about. And I'm trying really hard to not bring up specific examples that particularly trigger me. But in terms of making examples and like driving this point home, again, I think it's just a lack of, and again, I'll blame America, but I think it's worldwide. It's a lack of understanding of the scientific method. And you know, when we talk about, and again, not to get, I'm sure if people are listening to this part, I might regret saying this next part, but I think a lot of it is religion is not a bad thing per se, but I think that it's gotten to a point where, again, in this day and age, where science is no longer like this high level of thinking, and something like religion says you believe in your faith. It's faith. So if you believe in that vaccines don't work, or vaccines cause 5G causes COVID, whatever crazy conspiracy theory, QAnon, whatever. I'll say all the keywords so I get flagged. But the point is, if you find, you know, and again, it's a lot of this stuff, without going too far down the rabbit hole of QAnon, let's say, is a lot of it is, you know, when you hear social scientists talk about these concepts, it's people who are looking for some kind of purpose in their daily lives, and they find it on these chat groups, and they're saying, oh yeah, like, let's protect children. That sounds like a very important thing. Oh, Tom Hanks is eating children. Sure. Like, I don't know that that's not true, so I'm going to believe that. And at the same time, like, I'm going to put my energy and time and thought into that. And it becomes a slippery slope. And I'm going on a very extreme example, but it's definitely something I'm very passionate about, figuring out a way to improve scientific literacy. So again, when people, you know, I worked in home healthcare, in physical therapy for a while, and a lot of people who are very religious, you know, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses would certainly start speaking with me about, you know, their faith. And again, I was very respectful as a professional, and but I say I believe in science. I'm just not a religious person, and you know, they would try to engage with me on the fact that, you know, all these different aspects of it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm very happy that you found that for you. But yeah, here's where I stand with it. So anyway. Sorry, I went on a little bit of my tangent there, but
that's
yeah,
all right. I enjoyed your rant. I think it's just an undermining of expertise.
Yeah.
And the issue that we have is it's so easy now to confirm your bias, to go on Google and find one person that believes in what you believe in, e.g. the flat Earth movement. So that grew exponentially in popularity because a guy put out a video that made people want to believe and be part of that, because it goes back to that community. So to tie it back, why do I do the work I do? Why do I do men's groups? Because I want to provide healthy community, not toxic community. And you know, our confirmation bias, our need to make decisions emotionally and then confirm that decision, goes back to being part of groups. If you look at things, they can become very tribal. You know, you have anti-vaxxers, they're a group. They want to identify like that, and they'll tell you things like, well, I'm just asking the questions. And it's like, yeah, great, there's a ton of information that answers that question for you. Like, do you actually want to look at that? And it can be very difficult to engage in a conversation. You know, as a sports coach, as an emotional coach, I engage in these conversations all the time with people where you're like, where did that idea come from? And often they can't answer it because they haven't thought their way into it. So the other thing is, you can't argue somebody out of a position they haven't thought their way into.
Yeah.
If it's an emotional one, you have to connect with them on an emotional level, not on a cognitive level, because they haven't made a decision about that viewpoint. They just decided it. Like, immigrants are coming into the country, we're all going to lose our jobs. Okay, the data doesn't really support that in the same way that actually when we have immigration, we create more wealth and more jobs. But people aren't.
You're only saying that because you're an immigrant. I'm an immigrant too. It's fine. I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, they might not let me be a citizen. I've applied. I should be one already, but due to COVID, that process has slowed down massively. It usually takes 6 months, and it's been over a year now. Yeah. But so it's just, if we really want to be a good leader and we really want to be a good sports coach, we really want to be a good teacher, it's so important for us to know where our confirmation bias is. What are the things that we're holding on to emotionally that could be proven wrong with facts? And the more open we are to looking at that, the more successful we will be, because we're going to engage others and empower them and ask them to be part of the process, because we don't have to have all the answers, and there's a real strength in that as a leader. And then we're not going to be left behind by more innovative people. And you see that, the great example is the Blockbusters versus Netflix. So Blockbusters decided that they had an opportunity to get into online video sharing, and they said, no, it's not going to work, and we're going to stick with what we know. And, they went from being this massive business to being bankrupt in like a year. And you see that all the time, where people cannot change with the times. And the reason they can't change with the times is usually because of confirmation bias.
Yeah, man. It's it's frustrating. It's scary as someone. And at the end of the day, again, this is where I think we have to come back to ourselves. And it becomes overwhelming to try to solve this grand problem of something like a QAnon or this racism that goes on, where, again, I've had conversations with people that I didn't realize were as racist as it turns out they are. And that, you have a conversation about some of this stuff and you're like, oh, like, I did not know you believe that, but now thank you for revealing yourself to be that. And now I have that information and I can do with that what I will, and I'm probably never going to speak with you again. Or,
the last 5 years have definitely changed some friendships, haven't they? And one of the sad things of social media is people have become. So there was a study done recently that showed you can track pretty closely the widening of the political divide in this country with the invention of the like button on Facebook and Twitter. And the psychology behind it is, when people are trying to get likes, they will become more controversial. They'll become more
polarized.
They will become more polarizing, because when they do that, they get more likes. So subconsciously, we're getting this feedback loop of, oh, that post I put up had more likes. I'm going to lean more in that direction. And unfortunately, with the advent of social media, people have that platform to do it. So they're putting up more controversial posts. They're getting more likes. They might not even necessarily fully believe what they're saying, but they're liking the strokes. So we all want strokes. We all want to be liked. We all want appreciation. And if we're getting that on social media, we can be tempted to exaggerate our positions. And then now suddenly we're creating this big polarity that just wasn't there before.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so there's no space for nuance, basically, is the other frustrating thing. And so again, I think that the last year, especially leading up to the US election, got very just more and more boiling hot. Everything got much more intense. I do think, and I feel that at least everything's calmed down a little bit on the day-to-day, maybe, of, at least, and I tried really hard to not take in too much, because it can get really overwhelming. But the nuance is one of my biggest takeaways from the last year of, again, interacting with other people, is if you're not willing to have a nuanced conversation, and this is why I actually really almost doubled down on doing this podcast and started doing a lot more episodes, especially going into 2021 here, of I just really enjoy these long form conversations. I enjoyed listening to the Joe Rogans. Not every episode that he's done, not everything that he says do I agree with, but just that long form conversation is a really cool way to explore these topics. So I do think that,
and you have to be, we have to be open, like as two people, we come in with our own dogma, with our own confirmation bias, our own perceived views, our own view of the world, and we have to be open to be changed. So I used to be very dogmatic, like, this is it, I'm right, you're wrong. Every conversation is an argument to win. And I'm working so hard on dropping that now. And my view is, how curious can I be? What can I learn? What can I learn from this conversation? What of my ideas can be challenged? And by being curious, it takes the will to win away. You're not trying to win. You're trying to find the truth, which is different from winning. And we can find that truth together rather than I'm trying to make you look stupid or I'm trying to make myself feel better by winning an argument.
That's one of the that's a really fun thing you said that, because that's one of the like personality testing questions that I like to actually really, I think tells me a lot and worth exploring when I talk with clients and when we are talking a little bit more about this kind of mindset of it is, would you rather win or be right? Which is it, Lee? Would you rather win or be right?
It was, I would rather be right. Now I'd rather win.
Really? That's interesting.
It depends on the circumstance, and depends on what's at stake. Like be right as in be morally right, I would choose morally right over winning. If it's can I put my own ego aside to say, help a business owner win, then I would rather put my ego aside to help the business owner win. So depending what you mean by winning.
It's an interesting thing too, because it becomes a little bit of a Rorschach test, if you will, of how do people interpret it. Because it's an interesting, and that's where I definitely like to, again, have that nuance follow up. Because if you just answer it on the face of it, I'm going to interpret that as something possibly different than what you're just saying. To me, it means a little bit more of, so if you'd rather win, then you're okay being wrong, and you're just going to muscle through and just push your agenda and confirmation bias through. So that's where, to me, that's the simplistic way I look at the question. Is if you say you'd rather win, that tells me you're okay with being wrong. So and you're not okay with losing. So that's what's more important to you is, would you rather win or lose, or like which is more painful for you, right? And so again, and that's where the moral side of it too is. I say I would rather be right, even if I end up losing. And again, like with the political stuff, I feel like I'm on the right side of a lot of these debates that are going on. And it's not, I don't care if I don't win in that interaction with that person who's saying, oh, my white uncle got harassed by the police too. And I'm like, okay, like that doesn't mean there's no systemic racism against black people. Like it's not how that's not math. Like, but again, I'm not going to work on convincing that person in that situation. So the win versus be right thing. The other interesting, I'm sure.
So how could you? So here's my challenge to you. Like, how could you see that differently? What could be the common ground? How can you, what's being right in that? Is it holding on to your view, or is it helping them come to a different viewpoint? Like, how could you share with that person that, yes, it's entirely possible that your uncle suffered from, police brutality, unfairness, whatever you want to call it. Does that minimize the fact that somebody who's black is more likely to suffer that? No, it doesn't.
Right.
Both those things can be true at the same time. So what's the right?
Right. Again, in my experience in those conversations, it's just too much to overcome, like you're saying that. I think I forgot exactly how you said it earlier, but that if they didn't fight to get,
if you haven't thought your way into a position, it's very difficult to think your way out of it or to be argued out of it. And so then you got to apply to the emotion there. And the emotion is, I get that must have been really horrible for your uncle. I hear that, and I understand that maybe you're afraid of that happening to you. What would it be like for you to imagine what a black person is going through in that same circumstance?
Right.
That would be appealing to the emotion there, rather than just saying, you're wrong. The studies show us and the facts show us that you're just wrong and you can't listen to me.
Statistics show
and it's hard. Yeah, and it's really hard. I think I'm pretty skilled at this stuff, and it's still very hard to have conversations with people that have such diametrically opposed views to you in a nuanced way.
Yeah. And they're very deeply rooted views that, again, carry a lot of emotion, including
probably carried from childhood, from either
very culturally ingrained
media messaging, cultural messaging, parenting, and then you're trying to, why do people become more liberal when they go to cities? Because they get more exposed to different cultures, to different ideas, and they go, what I was told as a child might not be true. So that's why people become more liberal at cities. It's not that, wow, there's some magical fairy dust that gets sprinkled on everybody as soon as they get to a city. It's they get a more nuanced view of life.
Right. Or the people who go to college become more liberal because they're being brainwashed, or they're learning more things, and they're being
Exactly.
exposed to more things, and they're being able to make up their mind and be like, oh, this very closed off view that I had in this town I came from of 3,000 people that most people don't ever leave. I'm now reading these books and hearing about experiences and talking to people from other parts of the world. And so anyway, but the other component or concept that it reminded me of, that kind of exactly what you said, is, I'm sure you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Yes?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I love this one.
Yeah.
I listened to a great podcast. I'll see if you can find it, by the guys that invented it. It was fascinating to hear them talk about it. So the concept of to simplify it to its absolute most simple, the less you know, the more you think you know. That's like the most simple version of it, and it is a lot more complex than that.
Right.
But we see that play out all the time. I used to see that all the time with sports coaches. The less they knew about how complex the sport could be, the more simple they thought it was. And right, we're just going to train this way because that's the way to do it. The more you understand about, about psychology, about physiology. At the end of my coaching career, I was a really, cycling coaching career, I was a really knowledgeable, experienced cycling coach, and I would look and think, oh my God, there's so much more for me to know.
Yeah. The way I always say it is the opposite, maybe from my own viewpoint of the world, is the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
Exactly.
There's just so much more to learn. And again, for anybody, and again, this is that political thing of, oh, Bill Gates is out to, whatever, and that's it. Like, that's all you need to know.
Microchips into your vaccine.
Whatever it is. But, and that's all I need to know. And I don't really need any evidence to support it, again, whatever it is. And so therefore that's it. And if you see, there is if anyone wants to Google it, isn't familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, there's a graph. And again, that level of the concept of knowledge is super high in the beginning. And then as time goes on and you learn more things, you realize that, that awareness of how much you actually know is very low. Eventually, like, that's wisdom down the line, I guess, as you start to maybe get a little more down the line, and maybe you can focus on one or two areas where you're an expert and can even speak on it to some extent with some knowledge. But and that's why, again, I love doing these podcasts. I'm super grateful for people like you coming on here and having these conversations with me, sharing what they know, and we can kind of, again, challenge each other's biases and hopefully not just become an echo chamber of agreeing on the same stuff. I
had a coaching friend who summed this up really nicely, I thought. And he said this with no malice, no judgment. He just said, talking about another coach, they know so little, they don't know how much more there is to know.
Yeah.
And I think that really sums it up nicely, is if you don't know how vast a subject is, then you don't know how much more there is to know. And the problem that we face in society now is we have experts that do know how vast things are. But part of the Dunning-Kruger effect is the more you know, the more hesitant you are, because you're like, could there be a little bit more? Is there a bit I don't know? I'm not sure. If you don't know and your knowledge is very limited, you seem to be very confident. So you just say, this is it. This is the way it should be. Right. And when the more knowledgeable person says, well, maybe it's not that way, really they should say it's not that way. But they don't, because they want to be absolutely sure and they want more evidence.
That's another great quote that I saw the other day, of basically the problem with the world is people who don't know much have very few doubts. They're very confident. And people who have a lot of knowledge have a lot of doubt. Full of doubt. Because that's the more you know. You're like, I don't know if the vaccination is really the best thing. At some point, we have to make a decision on that. But, risk reward, same thing. Is gluten good for me or bad for me? I'm saying, well, I don't know. But let's explore this concept. Let's go down this path. And let's be willing to talk about it. And again, I hate using concepts like, oh, I'm an expert on, even though I have a doctorate in physical therapy makes me an expert in musculoskeletal health, technically, by kind of what the definitions of the words mean, and what the education should imply. But again, I know people who have doctors, same, degree as I do, that either didn't continue their education. And, I would say I spent $250,000 at least on just, around the human body education over the last, whatever, 15 years that I've gone through this whole process. And again, do I know the most about it? No, I know a lot. And when it comes to,
and then there could be somebody else that comes in and knows like 100% more than you do on hands.
Right.
You know, or you know, 200% more than you do on how the eye functions.
Right.
And that's what we tend to see, isn't it? As we become more expert, our field of knowledge gets smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. And it's why people think they're experts on everything when they have very little knowledge about each subject. And then when you become more and more knowledgeable, you realize how intricate your own subject is. You become more and more narrow. You know, I started as a cycling coach. I coached everybody. By the end of my career, I just wanted to coach track sprinters, which is the smallest subset of that sport, because that was where I felt that I had the most knowledge. And if I wanted to be a really good coach, I needed to have a lot of knowledge.
They say the riches are in the niches. So I still haven't gone to the point where I've niched down myself. So maybe I will.
You could be the world's greatest expert on big toes.
There you go.
Nobody knows more than you about the big toe. You are the man on the big toe.
Hopefully that's something. I don't know. I'm gonna pass on that one. But I want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate so far where we've gone. Unless there's any other major closing thought you had or wanted to share with the people.
I guess, you know, my offering to people is, where is your dogma and where is your confirmation bias? So what is the belief that you could get most angry about when challenged, yet you haven't really researched? What is that thing that you're holding on to that's getting in your own way? Because for you to enjoy life more, to be more successful at what you do, there's something getting in the way of it. What could that be? You know, you can reach out to me if you want to talk about that more one-to-one. We run men's groups. You can be part of that. My wife runs women's groups. But really, I just want to leave people with, what's that thing that's getting in the way of you being the best version of what you are? And it's usually some held belief, either some limiting belief or some held belief that's stopping you from being able to progress.
Gotcha. Well, tell everyone where they can find you if they did want to reach out to you.
So mypcoaching.org is our website. And you can find us Maximize Your Potential Coaching on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube.
There you go. Guys, check it out. Tons of great content on there. Hopefully we'll have a part 2 on this. And again, I'm definitely going to update folks on my experience tomorrow. Looking forward to my first MYP men's group. We're going to sign off here, guys. Hope you got at least 1% better from this episode. Feel free to comment, like, share, review, rate, smash that like button, whatever, all that fun stuff that happens. And we'll talk to you next time. Have an awesome, healthy, introspective day. We'll call it all that good stuff. And we'll peace out.